I know that I sometimes repeat myself too much. I make the reference to the old carpenter's aphorism, measure twice and cut once. That's definitely something to consider when you're planning a database. You want to do everything you can right up front because there are some decisions that are extraordinarily difficult to undo or change once the database is laid down and things get rolling. And I'll make reference to specific examples in just a moment when we hit the demo and actually create our database. But step 0 in planning an Oracle database is answering the question, what is the main purpose of the database? And generally speaking, a database, a relational database specifically, is either an online transaction processing or OLTP database, or it's an online analytical processing or OLAP database. Now, what's the difference between those? Well, basically, if you envision that your database is going to be volatile, in other words, the data is likely to be updated, added to, deleted fairly regularly, then you're looking at principally a transaction-oriented database. So you're going to want to think in terms of speed, data access speed, concurrency, and data protection. On the other hand, if you envision that the data will be largely archival or potentially read-only, in other words, you have business analysts who need to dig into the data and look for trends, so-called data mining, decision support. There's a lot of buzzwords that are thrown around now in the 21st century. But basically, we're thinking about looking at data from an analytical standpoint rather than creating new records and making updates and so on. Now, you can have the best of both worlds. You can use database replication to have one copy be your main transaction-oriented database and then offload a lot of concurrency to a replicated instance that you focus on for OLAP or analytics purposes. But I'm just, at this point, just throwing these terms out and giving you something to think about because depending upon the use of the database, that's going to focus you along certain lines. Specifically, what kind of hardware do you need or can you afford to devote to your database? We've covered already the main 4 subsystems of computer hardware, which are, as you know, is memory, processor, hard disk, and network. In my experience with Oracle Database, the 2 main subsystems to consider are RAM, which of course is your installed physical memory, and hard disk space. You want to think in terms of capacity, the amount of RAM, and also the speed of RAM. For hard disk space, again, you could have tiered storage where you have solid state as tier 1, traditional mechanical hard drives for tier 2, and how you're laying out your table spaces and data files is going to depend upon your needs for faster or slower access. For instance, you might have a Tier 1 storage devoted to OLTP schema objects, and you might put your OLAP analytical stuff on lower-cost second-tier mechanical hard drives because there may not be a pressing need for speed, as it were. I also mentioned previously in this course that if you're thinking of virtualizing Oracle Database, that's perfectly cool, just don't skimp on the virtual hardware. There's no shortcuts when it comes to virtualization, I'm afraid. In Oracle Database 12c, we have multi-tenancy, and this is, at least according to Oracle, where they're steering us, should be the default deployment option for a database. In fact, I predict that eventually the non-container database will probably be deprecated and removed from the product because there's really no downside to doing pluggable databases. Well, of course, there's always a downside, right? But in general, it's all aces, right? What you've probably found historically, if you've done Oracle Database Administration to date, is that when you have need for multiple databases, so-called departmental databases, let's say different business units need their own Oracle database instance for some line of business purpose, you wind up spreading a lot of memory structures and background processes across your hardware. As you know, with traditional Oracle, there's a one-to-one relationship between the instance and the database, and each database means that you have a separate set of background processes and memory structures. This makes it quite difficult to scale Oracle and also makes things like patching and updates potentially a nightmare. Thus, the concept of multi-tenancy means we can collapse or consolidate multiple databases all in the context of a single set of background processes and a single set of memory structures that are shared.